Today on Dungeon Craft, I review Dungeon World by Sage Latorra and Adam Koebel. Welcome to Dungeon Craft. I'm Professor Dungeon Master. Today is my first review, and it is of Dungeon World, a book by Sage Koebel Press. That's Sage Latorra and Adam Koebel. Dungeon World is a 400-page tabletop RPG, and I'm going to give you my opinion of it today. Now, just like I Dungeon Master differently, I'm going to be doing reviews a little differently. Reviews are typically timely. That is to say that they're printed when a product is released. And the purpose of a review is to generally say whether it's worth your money or not. This book was released 5 going on 6 years ago. It's up to its 6th printing. So this review isn't exactly timely. And it's not my style to give negative reviews. Today's RPGs feature fantastic artwork, slick pages, great hardback presentation. It's not like the old days when they published any old role-playing game, like Macho Women with Guns. Let's just take a moment to remember this was actually a thing. So I'm never really going to say, well, this thing is a piece of junk, save your money. Instead, I'm going to be reviewing the things that I like, the things that have a place on my shelf and a place next to my bedside table where I'm going to read them constantly. So let's plunge ahead with Dungeon World. So it's an RPG, and if you look inside, you're going to see ability scores like Strength, Intelligence, Wisdom, Constitution, Dexterity. There are classes, levels, hit points. It looks like Dungeons & Dragons. And it is. The monsters, most of the spells, everything is Dungeons & Dragons except the resolution system. Instead of using a d20, it uses a different mechanic, and it's quite revolutionary, and I'm going to show it to you. To resolve any task in Dungeon World, you roll a pair of 6-sided dice and add your appropriate ability score modifier. If the result is 10, 11, or 12, your character succeeds. On a 7, 8, or 9, they succeed, but with complications. On a 6 or under, your character fails, but you gain 1 experience point. This character is being pursued by a horde of angry goblins. A stone bridge spans this bottomless chasm, but some of it is crumbled away. She'll have to leap over the chasm to escape. With her +1 dexterity modifier, the player rolls an 11 for a total of 12, and easily makes it to the other side. A roll of 7, 8, or 9 will also succeed, but with complications. The Dungeon Master might rule the character dropped a weapon or a valuable piece of treasure. A roll of 6 or under indicates a clear failure. The character falls into the bottomless chasm, never to be seen again. Here our character faces off against another squad of goblins. D&D combat features a lot of rolls. First you have to roll for initiative, then each side takes its turn rolling to attack. But in Dungeon World, only the players roll the dice. There is no initiative, and 1 die roll is used to determine whether the player character hits or is hit by the monsters. Even with the character's strength bonus, a roll of 4 is a failure. The character misses and the goblin hits. The Dungeon Master rolls the goblin's damage die, in this case a d6, and subtracts it from the character's hit points. 7 means success with consequences. Typically, both the goblin and the character will wound each other. A roll of 10 indicates complete success. Now the player has a choice to make. If they wish to play it safe, they can hit the goblin, score that damage, and the goblin doesn't get to hit them back. Or they can choose to score an extra d6 in damage, but if the goblin isn't killed by that blow, the goblin gets to score damage as well. Combat with multiple combatants is where this game gets really innovative. Here our fighter is being attacked by 4 goblins. In D&D, this would necessitate 4 rolls to hit, and then 4 damage rolls. Here let's say the fighter rolls a 5 and is subject to damage. Instead of rolling damage 4 times, the Dungeon Master just rolls once. Let's say they rolled a 3, and they add an additional point for every additional combatant over the first one. 3 extra goblins means the fighter loses 3 extra hit points for a total of 6. A roll of 8 indicates that the fighter and the goblins would both take damage. And a roll of 11 means the fighter causes damage on the goblin and is able to defend herself against potentially unlimited opponents, which I think is really cool and cinematic. So how do missile attacks work? Well, check out the archer behind the statue. On a 10 she rolls damage and she'll probably take out 1 goblin and they'll get no chance to attack her back. But on a 7, her position will be revealed, allowing the goblins to close the gap. By now you should get an idea of how much faster Dungeon World is than D&D. In D&D, this combat would require 2 initiative rolls, 1 for the goblins, 1 for the player character. The fighter and the goblins would get their attacks. That's 5 more rolls. But what takes 7 rolls in D&D, Dungeon World does in just 1 roll. And moreover, the players are always doing the rolling. There's no people checking their cell phones as the Dungeon Master rolls for all the monsters. Even failing is kind of fun because you have to keep track of every failure. You're constantly getting experience points from them. In D&D, a scene like this just isn't possible at first level. A dragon would fry new characters. But in Dungeon World, it's totally possible. A first level fighter with a +2 strength would hit this dragon on a 5 or better. Instead of making you harder to hit, armor in Dungeon World absorbs damage. If the fighter scores 8 points of damage and the dragon's scales give him 3 armor points worth of protection, it means he only suffers 5 hit points of damage. Not only is this more realistic, but one could argue it makes for a faster, more exciting game. You ever have one of those sessions where you just can't roll an 18 and hit the dragon? I mean, it's boring. At least with Dungeon World, you get a chance to always hit and wound something. And you don't have to wait until you've played 24 sessions and made it up to 8th level to face off against something cool, like a dragon. Characters in Dungeon World begin with their maximum hit points. Each class comes with base hit points. To that you add your Constitution score, and that is going to be your maximum hit points, and they will never go up. The base hit points for fighter are 10, so 10 plus a fighter's Constitution of, for example, 14 means they will begin with 24 hit points. Clerics start the game with 8 base hit points, thieves with 6, and wizards with 4. This means the average character is going to have between about 15 and 25 hit points. When characters advance in levels, they get access to new spells and moves, but their hit points never increase. This means low-level characters are tougher, but high-level characters are never invincible. Monsters have lower hit points too, making the game much faster. This dragon, for example, would have 5 armor points, but only 16 hit points. Goblins have 3 hit points, so do orcs, and that makes combat a lot faster with a much higher body count. It's also much more cinematic, with characters able to kill orcs with a single sword thrust or a single shot of an arrow. And look at how brief these monster descriptions are. This description of a goblin is only 1 paragraph long. At the top you can see its damage, hit points, and armor, the only statistics you're really going to need. The rest of the monsters are going to look familiar to any D&D player. For example, here we have a cloaker, a black pudding, an owl bear, and a dragon. Look at the sparse descriptions at the top. It's solitary, huge, terrifying, cautious, and it's a hoarder. You've got its damage, hit points, and armor, and just a handful of lines of text. No long descriptions of its ecology, how it came to be, or illustrations. And I'll be honest, as a dungeon master, this is all I really need. I can describe a dragon, and I can make up the details for myself. One interesting feature of Dungeon World is the way damage is calculated. Instead of rolling by weapon type, you roll by class. A fighter does d10 damage regardless of the weapon they're using, so it could be a dagger, it could be a sword, it could be a bow. Some people might find this unrealistic, but I actually like it because a fighter with a bow who actually fights in war is going to be different and much more accurate than someone who does it only occasionally like a rogue. That kind of makes sense. I mean, I could pick up a dagger and use it on someone, but a Green Beret is trained on how to use it and will probably know how to score more damage. Also, players are always asking, hey, can I be a two-handed knife fighter? And the answer is, yeah, sure, you just do d10 damage. Now, is Dungeon World a retro clone or its own new thing, or is it a derivation of Dungeons & Dragons? I'm going to leave that up to you, but the way I think of it is, if we were designing Dungeons & Dragons from scratch, if I were designing it from scratch today, Dungeon World is what I'd come up with. The system is extremely fast, elegant, and playable. By simplifying monster statistics, Dungeon World allows a dungeon master to create the monster statistics in just moments. There are a couple of drawbacks. It's very texty. There's very few pictures to break up the text, although that could be a plus because you have more space for information. One thing that's missing here that's in most role-playing games is a sample character sheet. That would have been helpful, especially for new players who've never played a role-playing game before, because you could sort of see what a character actually looks like. But I don't think Dungeon World's audience are people that have never played a role-playing game before. I think the audience of Dungeon World are people who want to simplify their role-playing game. As a dungeon master, sometimes you spend more time planning for the game than actually sitting at the table and playing the game. Working out those large blocks of monster statistics is one of the reasons the job is so difficult. And the other problem is D&D's scalability problem, which I've spoken about a number of times in other videos. As the characters get more powerful and they get more spells and they get more hit points, and the monsters get more hit points and spells and counter moves, it becomes a lot harder to run the combats. That's especially true at high levels, but with Dungeon World, that is not the case. Monsters are only a handful of numbers. Because the Dungeon Master is spending less time working out statistics, they have more time to work on the storylines and plots. When I first read Dungeon World, I was blown away. I said to myself, this is going to be my new game system. This is so easy to Dungeon Master. It's so easy to plan for. I have a large group. It's got 6 or 8 people in it, depending on the night. It's so hard to plan for them. This is going to make my life so much easier. They're going to love this. And we played Dungeon World for 2 sessions, and they hated it. They didn't like the idea that every time they missed with a 7, 8, or 9, that they might be injured as well. So the system to them, I think it was just too fast and too simple, and they like the feeling of 20-sided dice. There's nothing like the roll of natural 20 to get a table cheering, especially if it comes at a critical time. I don't know why. I will give that to the players. Rolling a 10 or even a 12, it just doesn't feel as cool as getting the natural 20. Now what's interesting is I also tried Dungeon World on players who've never played role-playing games before, specifically high school students. When I play D&D with my high school students, I often only have an hour or an hour and a half, and so Dungeon World allows us to get a lot more gameplay. Players without preconceived notions of what D&D is supposed to be, Dungeon World feels very realistic and natural. Concepts like armor absorbing damage kind of makes sense. So if you have limited time and you want to simplify your game, or you want to introduce Dungeons & Dragons to children, Dungeon World is the way to go. Dungeon World is simple, fast, and at $20, this is a bargain. When you think about everything that are in those D&D hardback books, the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, Monster Manual, and you total up the price of those books, you're in over $100. All that information is here at this paperback version of Dungeon World for just $20. It is an immense value. So if you have questions about Dungeon World or comments because you've played the game, feel free to put them in the comments below. If you have found the review helpful, give it the thumbs up. For more great Dungeon Craft videos, subscribe. Once again, this is Professor Dungeon Master for Dungeon Craft. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at the table, and may all your rolls be 10 to 12, or natural 20, whichever you prefer.